right. So usually we have like a 30 or 40 participants, and sometimes they comes in the middle of discussion. So I think we are good right now. I think we can start because it's already 10 p.m. In the Midwest and 8 p.m. in California. So thank you everyone for being here and appreciate your time. And I'm Yanu Prastyo. I'd like to welcome you to the UBI webinar series. This is our annual monthly webinar series with the universal basic income discussion. Not only universal basic income, but also we discuss all those issues related to the poverty alleviation and then social welfare program and some other policies related to the poverty. So in this session, we are going to talk about universal social policies, the challenges and opportunities in the post-COVID-19 world. And with special keynote speaker, we have Pak Laude M. Sharif. He is an executive director of the Partnership for Governance Reform in Indonesia and the former commissioner of KPK, or Corruption Eradication Commission, from 2015 to 2020. And also we have three other incredible speakers from US and Indonesia. We have Catherine Thomas from Stanford University and Basic Income Lab in Stanford. We have Mbak Lily Hikam. That's her popular name, but his name actually is Halida Putri Widyastuti. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we call her Mbak Lily Hikam from University of California, and we'll have Pak Maktuhan, Executive Director of Prakarsa Center for Welfare Studies in Indonesia as well. But I think he will be joining us in the middle of the meeting. So without further ado, I would like to invite Pak Sharif to share his opinion and also perspective from Kemitraan or governance reform in Indonesia about the challenges and opportunities about universal policies in Indonesia, especially during the COVID-19. So how the government in Indonesia handling these issues, and what is the most the biggest challenge for kind of like progressive policies in Indonesia right now and in the future. So would you mind to share and also further introduce yourself, Pak Sharif?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I have to make a declaration that I'm not an economist. I have very small knowledge about universal basic income. I'm just humble lawyers who are concentrating on environments and anti-corruptions in the past, but because of my work at KPK and also as my teaching responsibility and my work as executive director of Kemitraan, they forced me to do a lot of things, including actually talking about universal basic incomes. So today I just want to share some of what I have actually think about it. This, you may see it actually very basic, because the discussion about universal basic income in Indonesia, it is also very, very new. It's not many people actually discussing it. So today, if you can allow me, I just want to share a few slides about what I have in mind. And I want you all, as the experts in this meeting, to discuss it further, because I really need to hear from you all. Thank you very much. So I'll try to put it in context by saying that universal basic income in the time of COVID-19, but I'm going to talk about the anti-corruption perspective in that. I'm not talking about whether universal basic income is good for Indonesia or universal basic income is the real answer for social safety net. I'm not an expert on it, but I just want to tell you about how universal basic income maybe, maybe can contribute to anti-corruption movement, especially on social safety net. Yeah, I just read it, defining characteristics of universal basic income. I think all of you actually have been seeing this but this is very new to me. So that's why I'm just putting it on my slide. It is periodic, actually given to the people as monthly basis or maybe fortnight basis. It is a cash payment and it is universal. It is paid to all and not targeted to specific population. It is individual, so it is paid on individual basis, not like a household. And this is unconditional. It involves no work requirement or sanction. It is accessible to those involved and out of work voluntarily or not. This is what I read since last night about universal basic income. And I see also a lot of like a pro and cons about universal basic income. People who are actually supporting it because it is poverty and vulnerability reductions and more choices to citizens on spending, better targeted of aid, insurance against shocks, boost financial inclusion, psychological aid to people, more administrative efficiency, and many others. As you can actually see it in my slide. And of course, some people say that it is actually against gender disparity included by cash, fiscal cost given political economy of exit, conspicuous spending, could put stress on banking system, and even create laziness to people. That's what actually people actually say about pro and cons on universal basic income. Some example of some experiments on UBI. I think I've seen like Finland, Canada, Kenya, United States, and Spain, Netherlands, Switzerland. And I think you guys actually have a better example because I just randomly, this opening, it's give me a lot of work actually because I have to study from the scratch. What is actually universal basic income things, you know? So you forced me to read more. So I read it actually since last night. So I went to bed like about 1 in the morning because I just try to understand it. What are you guys going to do? So, but I think it is important for me to understand it before I speak. What is anti-corruption aspect of it? It is actually Sri Mulyani, our Ministry of Finance. It's already said it in 2017. Indonesia is studying the possibility of implementing the idea of universal basic income in anticipation of automation triggered mass layoff in the coming years. So if all robots actually change, man actually in doing the job, so many people actually think about it. That thought in 2017 is nothing to do with COVID at all. And in the time of COVID, now people actually start think about it. Sailing through the perfect storm of COVID with universal basic income for Indonesia, going for Indonesian basic income. Now, because they see that actually it is maybe the answer, instead of creating a lot of policy that may actually create corruptions and also complicated, if we actually using universal basic income, it is actually settled. So people can actually stay at home, but at least they have very minimum wage that can actually support their life. Now, this is my thing. This is my thing. So, whether universal basic income can contribute to corruption prevention. I just want to show you the anatomy of legal basis of COVID-19 state financial policy announced by our presidents. In that particular law, I say you some, the feature of it. For example, budget authority stated in Article 2, in order to implement state financial policy as mentioned in Article 1.4, the government has the authority, 1, to make an adjustment on the amount of mandatory spending without the involvement of parliament at all. Usually you have to ask the parliaments. Now they're actually free to do it. The second, for example, the budget shift. They are also free to, and also further provision regarding state financial policy, as stated in point 1, will be regulated under Minister of Finance regulation. Meaning, in the past, every state budget has to be discussed in the parliament. The government and the parliaments need the approval of the parliament. Now, based on this particular law, give strong authority to the Ministry of Finance just to change everything, even to add some more of the money as a response to COVID-19. And this is also quite worrying, actually. For example, in Article 27.1, 2, and 8, it is actually stated, costs incurred by the governments to support COVID-19 program cannot be considered as state loss. So, for example, if you're actually procuring something that actually the price is inflated, it cannot be considered as state loss. So the KPK, the Corruption Eradication Commission, or the police, or the Attorney General of it cannot investigate it as state loss. And the official who issue government policy cannot be sued in civil and criminal proceeding, and cannot be challenged to the administrative court if they're doing it in a good faith. So this is make me thinking, it is just like give them actually a blank note. They can just do almost everything. As a comparison, you have to remember, I think for Indonesian, of course, they are actually familiar with this, the BLBI case and also the Century case, where the Indonesian government issuing, trying to rescue from bank by actually giving a lot of money. And there is no article, impunity article like this, but still actually corrupted. And some of the people who are responsible for that state loss, like Samsul Nur Salim, Michi Nur Salim, actually now reside in Singapore. We already charged him, but he still there. So he cannot do anything at all to it. And also, it is also created moral hazard. For example, this is actually the millennial, what you call it, the millennial advisor of the president. They are actually asking to use their company for those COVID money. The two of them is already resigned because a lot of pressure from social media and the Indonesian people. But one of them actually in the middle, he also asked the Ministry of Cooperative to transfer some of the project money to Papua through his company, for example. He is still there. So it is exactly created an example of created a moral hazard, because once they read the law, the legal basis for the use of COVID-19 related funds, they say, oh, there is no actually consequences, legal consequences if I can just do it my way, for example. So this is created moral hazard and of course a conflict of interest. I just try to give you about the amount of the Indonesian government promise or pledge. It is 695.20 trillion or about 6 billion US dollars, which is divided into six category. One on health, another one for social safety net, another one incentive for small and medium corporations, and also including taxes and others, and also assistance for ministries and provincials and local governments. Unfortunately, those big money, it is not supported with the complete comprehensive data. So for example, there are 203.90 trillion for social safety net, for example. We do not have one single verified data who actually have the right to receive those aid from the government. So this has created this complication. And as you can see, the total spending of COVID-19 budget per July 17, 2020, in the area of health, only 7.20% spent. For social safety net, it is quite a lot, which is 37.96%. For ministries and local government and provincial government, 6.3%. And for small and medium enterprise, about 24.42%. And for incentive for businesses, 11 to 20, but the incentive for corporation, it is not yet spent. So this is a lot of money, and the number came from the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. Another one, if you actually look at one case that's already emerged, like a Kimia Pharma, it is a state-owned company, procured a rapid test Biozec. It said that it is actually made in Netherlands, but when we check it, it is actually made in China. So they actually, of course, Chinese made and Netherlands made, it has always a different price. So, but again, because the law itself actually give them some immunity. So it is quite difficult for law enforcement agencies to deal and to investigate of such case. Now, if I'm going back to the universal basic income, if we have universal basic income, we may not need such complicated policy in the time of COVID because everybody will be covered easily. But again, is it the universal basic income is the real answer for Indonesia and other countries to prevent corruption in social safety net? I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. It is for you guys to discuss, and I thank you so much.
Thank you, Basarif. Thank you so much. I think it's covered all of the issues like related to the corruption. That's really important for developing countries like Indonesia. That we still have a really big problem on corruption and the law enforcement of some kind of policies like this. So I think that's really good takeaway from Basarif, that is it universal basic income the answer for Indonesia or for developing countries? So now we have Catherine Thomas from Basic Income Lab, Stanford University. She will share some of the project that she did and the survey as well in the US, and also some guidelines for if we want to implement basic income in the cities or in the urban area. I think Catherine did a really good job on make some guidelines for that as well. So we will learn together from her. So Catherine Thomas is PhD candidate in social psychology in Stanford University, and also has an experience as a consultant in World Bank and research specialist in Princeton University. And right now, she is a graduate fellow at the Center of Poverty and Inequality in Stanford University. So would you mind to share your research and your findings, Catherine?
Yes, there we go. Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to your group. I'm very honored to be here. I'm going to share. Let's see. You can let me know if you can see this.
Yep, perfect. You can see that.
Great. Okay. Excellent. So my goal today is to share a little bit about how views of UBI, Universal Basic Income, are changing in the US, ways that we can intentionally change the dialogue, the narratives that accompany Universal Basic Income, some of which were just spoken about, and then also to provide a toolkit for mayors, for governments, for nonprofits to use to implement UBI pilots and programs. So as our title suggests, I'll be talking about how we're seeing increases in support for UBI over the COVID crisis. So we just got an intro to UBI, so I won't go over that again. But I will say that in the US, at least, it's been historically proposed. Martin Luther King, a leader of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, proposed guaranteed income as a means to eliminate poverty and achieve economic justice. We're now seeing this. Most recently, we had a presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who supported, who ran a platform of universal basic income, like for the same reason that you just shared in that conversation piece in Indonesia, which is due to automation. That's been his main argument. Now we're seeing even, a renewed interest in guaranteed income back to similar reasons that Martin Luther King shared, which is due to racial inequalities in the US. So one thing that's really held us back that I work on, one of the biggest barriers to UBI in the US is that we have this very strong stereotypes about people who receive welfare. I'm not sure if they're as strong as well in Indonesia, but in the US, conservatives especially are likely to see poverty as a result of individual laziness and a lack of willpower, as opposed to seeing it as a result of discrimination or other societal structures. And we see that these beliefs of laziness and lack of willpower as an explanation for poverty are strongly correlated with opposition to universal basic income. But we're thinking that those sorts of narratives about the reasons for poverty and why someone might experience financial need are changing during the time of COVID. If 3 million Americans lost their job, this is back in April, I believe, we now have a rate of unemployment of 11%. It was about 13% a few months ago. We're now seeing supports for UBI that were really unthinkable just, in February, just 6 months ago. People such as Mitt Romney, Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker of the House, many people in Senate in Congress have proposed UBI. We even had one-time stimulus checks that were sent out in April from the government. And so the question is, can people still hold their beliefs about poverty being due to individual failings in the face of an economic crisis like the one that we're seeing? So how are views of UBI and of recipients changing over time, particularly over this COVID crisis? So in April, we conducted a study with several hundred individuals across the US and a politically balanced sample. We saw overwhelming support for universal social policies. The US is quite different from many OECD countries in that it does not have universal health care, universal preschools, certainly not universal basic income. We're seeing majority support for these universal social policies, particularly unemployment insurance, in April. And then we decided to run a series of other studies to look more in depth at UBI in particular as a universal social policy. So we ran some between 2017 to 2019. And then most recently, we ran a study in March and then in April with about 2,000 individuals. So when we asked people about their support for universal basic income, you'll see in 2017, 18, 19, these are liberals in the US, so progressives. These are moderates, and these are conservatives. We see that the conservative support, it kind of maxes out around 28%. That's what we were seeing in those previous years. It's pretty steady. And then liberal support was actually quite high when asked, kind of like as you found in Indonesia. Once you describe it, people were pretty much on board. And we're seeing that, however, that conservative support has jumped from 28% to about 45% now. And we aren't seeing much change among moderates or liberals. Liberals are already really high. Moderates, I'm not really sure why we're not seeing as much change there, but we're certainly happy to see less opposition from conservatives. Now, which conservatives are seeing these changes? We're seeing the greatest growths among white women. So you can see this is white women with the triangles and the dark red here. They had rates of about 25% support back in 2019 last year, and now they're almost up to about 50% in our samples at least. So they've had a steady growth up. People of color, both men and women, also saw an increase. The only group that we aren't seeing change on at all among conservatives is white men. So why are we seeing this support grow between at least March and April, and probably between 2017, 18, 19, and now? The first reason that we find, first explanation, is the normalization of financial hardship. So in this time, we saw about 40% of our sample had personally experienced financial hardship, or someone in their household had either lost a job or had their hours cut. And that is driving empathy, or a shared understanding of what it's like to experience need. And the second reason is that we find that 80% of people, 75% of people said that they were feeling a degree of uncertainty. So we're saying that that Americans in April were rating nearly 80% said that their American identity was more important than divisions in the country, like political ideology and race. In the US, we've seen a lot of political polarization growing over the past few years. And it seems like this could be a time for Americans to kind of overcome some of that political polarization, though I'm not sure how that's going to shake out given the recent protests. So we saw that increases in support recently have been concentrated among conservative women, especially conservative white women. Among those who have been financially impacted by COVID, so those who lost a job or had hours cut. Interestingly, we did not see, we were initially interested in how support for UBI might change as a result of personally receiving a check from the government via a stimulus check that went out in April. So every American, 90% of Americans got a check of $1,200 in April, and we're trying to see if that would increase support. But interestingly, that was pretty flat. This is just showing that people who had experienced financial impacts of COVID were 20% more likely to support basic income in April. We're also seeing that this could be a narrative changing moment. So if we think back to those narratives that even you were discussing, of people fearing that recipients would be lazy or would not be hardworking or be irresponsible with the money, we're showing that conservatives, who are the ones who are more likely to hold those views, are becoming less likely to hold them over the COVID crisis. So they see the typical recipient of basic income as being more similar to them, as opposed to dissimilar. So it's less othering of recipients, which is a problem that we have with the current welfare system. And they're also less likely to rate them as lazy. They're more likely to rate them as hardworking, actually. So that percentage has jumped quite a bit. So in short, they're less likely to stigmatize recipients of universal basic income. I'll skip this for now, but basically we're running an experiment to see if we can change the narrative about recipients of universal basic income by sharing stories of people who are trying to make, who are trying to move up in terms of their economic situation and who are able to receive support from the government effectively in such a way that makes their efforts pay off. So we're trying to create a narrative around the positive role of the government in supporting individual agency, which is something we care a lot about in the US. And the point of this is to say, we see support is higher for this condition, this narrative changing condition. So the point of this is to say that the way that we talk about universal basic income can affect support for it across the political spectrum. And so it's probably worthwhile to invest, just to say that shifts in narratives are possible. In fact, through the framing of basic income, you can achieve cultural change in narratives. And so in sum, for this part, we see that UBI support is increasing during COVID, particularly among conservative women and those most impacted. These narratives about recipients are shifting for the better. This is possibly due to an increasing personal experiences of financial misfortune. And then we're going to keep tracking these views over time and ideally see how they change voting patterns in the 2020 election, which is coming up, our presidential election. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and put on my hat as a graduate affiliate of the Stanford Basic Income Lab, or a past affiliate of the Basic Income Lab, and talk a little bit about UBI pilots that are going on in the US. So this is a map of pilots that are going on across the world that have been conducted in the past, that are ongoing, and that are proposed. And I don't think it's up to date for what I'm about to show you, but you can go to basicincome.stanford.edu to see this map. And I wanted to show you this because there are actually a lot of pilots going on in different cities across the US by governments and by mayors. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, 11 mayors of US cities declared that they're interested in pursuing, guaranteed income. I should note also there's a language shift. We used to talk about universal basic income in the US. That was kind of the dialogue of 2017 to 2019. And now there's been a big shift to talk about it as guaranteed income. And that's really an homage to Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights activist, and to relate it to racial inequalities, wealth inequalities in the US. So that's why you'll see guaranteed income a lot nowadays, as opposed to universal basic income. And so as we were seeing these pilots pop up across the US, we at the Basic Income Lab decided that we should create a toolkit to kind of aid cities in preparing pilots and designing them and carrying them out and communicating about them effectively and in trying to advocate for policy at scale. So we wrote this policy publication that is called Basic Income in Cities, A Guide to City Experiments and Pilot Projects. And this is a brief, basically a press release on it at this Medium link in case you want to see that. And I'll just go over just a few recommendations so you can see if this would be useful to you. The first is think about the core team. So engaging all of these people is instrumental to creating a pilot that will translate to scale, to a policy implemented at scale. So it includes policymakers, communities, researchers, a communications team, and a funding team. Here are some of the stages of stakeholder involvement. So bringing each of the stakeholders in at different times in the design, implementation, analysis, and next steps. Then I want to talk most about this part, which is the guide walks the reader through the nuts and bolts of designing a basic income program and gives evidence to recommend features that seem to make it more effective. So the first is in the name of the program to use non-stigmatizing and bipartisan language. In the US, we have this program that's called a Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And saying needy families is quite stigmatizing, calling people needy, designating very explicitly low social status. So, there are moves to use names like the Earned Income Tax Credit or Magnolia Mothers Trust or economic empowerment. The second is the amount of cash. More is generally better in the literature we find. Frequency, monthly is often preferred in the studies that have been conducted, at least in the US and in Kenya, though more evidence is needed. For the target population, the goal is generally inclusivity. I think that there's a trade-off between obviously financial viability and also political viability and bringing people in so that they feel invested. So if you receive the cash, maybe you're more invested and keep making it work for the long term. And then finally, conditions. We said unconditionality is key, though it's possible that you could implement minimal requirements like having people vote or get preventative care that would be good for society and that wouldn't put a big burden on individuals, but would make the program seem more legitimate in the eyes of voters. Implementing for successful outcomes. So the first one is safeguarding existing benefits. We've seen in a lot of pilots that these can threaten the benefits that people currently receive and that can make them worse off in the long run. We suggest using low-cost add-ons informed by behavioral science, such as supportive framings of the policy or financial health checks to help recipients use the money well in a way that serves their goals. And then support services that should go along with them, like mental health services or civic engagement opportunities. Lastly, the toolkit concludes with guidance on communicating the pilot and its findings to stakeholders, the recipients, the media, and policymakers. So we give individuals strategies to avoid pitfalls, like frankly what we saw in Finland, which was a lot of miscommunication over what actually happened in the pilot and what the results were. So this is where you can find that toolkit. And you can also find a table of ongoing pilots across the US, and please do contact, for more information or for this toolkit, you can contact me, CC Thomas at stanford.edu, or the Basic Income Lab at stanford.edu, which is a really wonderful resource. So yeah, thank you, and I'll look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you, Catherine. That's really comprehensive, from the survey to the tools or guidelines for implementing UBI. All right. I'd like to turn the time over to the next speaker. We have Mbak Lili Hikam, or Mbak Halida Putri Widyastuti. She is a PhD candidate from Department of Biological Chemistry, School of Medicine, the University of California. And she has also held a PS in Chemical Engineering from Pennsylvania State University, and MS degree in Biological Sciences in Chemical Engineering, University of California as well. So I'd like to give the floor to you, Mbak Lili. Would you mind to share?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have a slide prepared, so yeah, it's gonna.
It's okay. Sure.
Talking.
Perfect.
So Well, thank you for inviting me to this forum. It's an honor. I would like to thank Indo Big Network, UBI Lab Jakarta, and Kemitraan. This is a wonderful opportunity, although initially I'm not really sure why I was asked to speak here, but I guess Mas Yanu saw some of my writings and some of my social commentary and some of my political writings. And I guess he thinks that I would be a good addition to this forum. And so what I would like to do now is just, I guess, to comment a little bit on Catherine's research, what she has shown previously. And basically the main thing that I caught from her her talk was that in this time of pandemic, the universal support for many universal programs actually increased because one, people are actually finding it. I guess now we see that the suffering is basically universal now. So there's no excuse to just saying that the economical hardship that some people face is due to them being lazy and other than, and not because of the situation that they find themselves in. So I actually would like to read an article that I've written previously. And this is an article that I think this article that I wrote is basically, I'm trying to highlight just how bad, just how America is not handling this crisis so far. So here I stated that, so America is struggling in handling this COVID-19 pandemic. So out of all the developed countries in the world, the United States basically have the highest number of reported positive cases. And the latest tally is at 3.8 million, although I think by the time we are talking right now, there is an even higher case number. And this is the reported positive case. The actual number of cases we don't actually know because testing is still limited in this country, unfortunately. And the United States also has the highest number of deaths in the world, unfortunately, with 140,000 people dead due to COVID-19. And it has surpassed the number of American soldiers killed in the Vietnam War. And when we add to these horrifying statistics is also the skyrocketing unemployment number, as Catherine mentioned earlier, around 11% of the population is now unemployed. And this economic recession I think, is going to go towards the Great Depression territory, where almost basically a quarter of the population is unemployed. And if there are no economic assistance, no economic stimulus being given to the population. And furthermore, in the United States, as we all know, it's the only country, OECD country, where universal healthcare is not available. So most people here actually get their healthcare from their employers. So what does that mean when you have this very high unemployment number? It means that a lot of these people who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, I might add, are now also without healthcare. So all of these factors combined actually contributed to why America has such, cannot get this pandemic under control. So as the richest country in the world, we would assume that the United States would have the resources necessary to get this pandemic under control, or at least flatten the curve. So also as an outside observer, it's easy for us to claim that, oh, well, maybe this is all because of the current administration's fault, that they're so incompetent in handling this. But that is actually too simplistic of a claim to make, because you're only laying the blame at the feet of the Trump administration. Now, again, I'm not saying that this administration is blameless. They did act too late in limiting travel, and they didn't take the threat of pandemic seriously. They even fired some pandemic experts from the National Security Council, and so which basically leaves the country vulnerable to any incoming pandemic. So you can blame the Trump administration, but assuming that the other side of the aisle, which is the Democratic Party, is blameless is wrong, and it's far from the truth. So as Catherine mentioned earlier, the American citizen received a one-time stimulus payment to the tune of $1,200. So if you're wondering how do they get this number, it's very simple. So in the United States, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, which everybody can tell you is not enough to live on. So assuming you work 40 hours a week with 4 weeks in a month, so when you multiply all of that together, you get $1,160, which when you round it up comes to $1,200. Now, this is very disproportionate. This amount is very disproportionate when you compare this to the approximately $5 trillion in bailout money that American corporations receive. So basically what the American people receive right now is crumbs in comparison to the whole loaf of bread that the corporation received. And what is more outrageous is the fact that this stimulus bill that disproportionately basically benefit the wealthy and the corporations was actually approved with bipartisan support in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So both Democrats and Republicans are actually played a role, and they joined together to pass this bill, basically. So now try to put yourself in the shoes of an ordinary American person, or just any ordinary citizen of any country that you live in. So now imagine that you're living through a pandemic. You don't have healthcare and you don't have an income. So you've just been fired because the business you're working on decided to downsize since all of the customers are self-quarantining. So now the profits are down also. And the local government institutes a mandatory stay-at-home order, which means that you have to stay home without any income except that $1,200 that you get from the government. You have to use that to pay for your rent or your mortgage or to buy food. So the first month of the pandemic comes and goes. And with it, you also lose economic assistance, but everything else keeps coming. So your rent keeps coming, your mortgage bill still comes because there is no rent or mortgage cancellation. It's just a freeze that ends basically at the end of this month, which means that soon your rent and your mortgage that you owe since the start of the pandemic, which is in March, is due soon. And if you can't pay, you're evicted. Basically, you're homeless, you're out on the streets. And conveniently, the eviction ban that most states institute will also end at the end of this month. So you still can't find a job because the local businesses in your area can't afford another person on their payroll because they didn't get any small business loan from the government. And what's even more scandalous when you read the news, reports just showed that actually the small business loans that is part of the first stimulus package, or first or the second, one of those, they're actually shown to benefit big businesses more. So as an example, Kanye West, Yeezy, actually got some business loans from this small business loan program, okay? So now you have no choice. You have to break quarantine. You have to get yourself one of the essential jobs, is either an Uber driver or a DoorDash driver. The Indonesian equivalent for that is a Gojek driver. And those jobs, at least in America, offers no benefit, which means you do not get any health insurance. So if you do get sick due to exposure to coronavirus, you're on your own. So you're struggling to make ends meet. And then on top of that, you see your government and they're not doing anything to alleviate your problems. Instead, they're arguing on TV about which can of beans is the best one. Okay, so this lack of economic assistance and basically trust in the administration and this dissatisfaction in how this government is handling the COVID program fuels to this desperation and this need for something, anything, any stimulus. So I think that is why even among conservatives, support for UBI jumped during COVID, because now they're seeing a shift in dogma and in narrative that people who need help are not just, lazy people or so-called welfare queens. Anybody could be put in this situation and any helping hand from the government would be appreciated. So currently no economic assistance and still no universal health care for the American people. What is happening though here is that big and small businesses are basically forced to reopen too soon because they can't afford to be shut down for an extended period of time, which means that they're forcing their employees to work. They're exposing their employees to the virus. Then they're also exposing the customers to the virus. Additionally, this record unemployment is causing at least 32% of homeowners to miss their mortgage or rent payment, which as soon as the eviction ban is lifted by the end of this month, you will get a new homelessness crisis. So it's taking together all of these facts. So it's no wonder that the United States every single day sets a single day record for most coronaviruses case reported. And the uncontrolled rise of these COVID-19 cases can be seen as a consequence of a set of policies that are not at all aimed at helping people, but more aimed at propping the economy, propping up the market to create a false sense of, I guess, economic security, but not for the working people, for people who own stocks, people who own basically the majority of wealth in this country. So it really saddens me to see that Indonesia is not learning from how disastrous the United States is handling this pandemic, or rather it seems to be copying the way it's handling it. So I have a really bad joke, and the joke is that Indonesia is the United States of ASEAN, since we're beating any other countries in the region with the sheer number of cases and deaths. So just yesterday, I think, we see that Indonesia has actually surpassed China, the place where the virus originated, in positive COVID-19 cases. So the Indonesian healthcare system is a bit better than America's for-profit healthcare system, since we have BPJS. I know people have issues with BPJS, but at least you can still go to the doctor without going bankrupt in Indonesia. For some people. But the response other than that has been very lackluster, to say the least. There was a lot of downplaying of how urgent this pandemic is. The administration's initial reluctance in imposing a quarantine only helped this virus to spread. And now there is a very premature, in my opinion, push to return to normalcy, to lift any physical distancing mandate, despite all evidence to the contrary that Indonesia doesn't really have this virus under control. Yeah, so it's really disheartening to see that this virus that can be controlled, as we've seen in countries where a strong social safety net has been implemented way before this this virus exists, is handling it. So if we look at countries like Germany, Norway, Canada, and New Zealand, the way they're handling this pandemic, they have greatly reduced the number of cases and slow down the spread because they've enacted strong social safety net programs, because they do have a universal basic income, because they take action to prevent people from becoming unemployed by having the government cover the payroll and the payroll of small and middle businesses, and by enacting rent and mortgage holidays, so people are not in danger of being evicted, of being homeless, that they're very desperate to go out, break quarantine, and yeah, risk exposure. So there is a way to get these viruses under control, but and we have more than and I'm pretty sure we have more than enough resources to go around to enact these policies. Also, then yeah, I think that's it for me. And I hope, but unless the federal government or the central government are unwilling to implement any of these policies, and without a strong push from the civil society, it would be hard to see any of these progressive policies implemented. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Lily. It was so thoughtful, and yeah, I think like United States of ASEAN, you said about Indonesia, it's always following United States of America. Even that's so, like a bad in handling kind of this kind of crisis. But yeah, I mean, the leadership problem, political communication, all the belief in science, or this, like kind of disbelief in science, a denial at the beginning of the virus until now, is still a huge problem in both the big countries in East and in the West. So yeah, before we have a question and answer, in the end of the session, we have our last speaker, Mas Aha Maftuhan. He is the executive director of the Prakarsa, or Center for Welfare Studies in Indonesia. Mr. Maftuhan has an experience as a technical office on good governance program in Aceh, 2007-2008, and he holds master degree from Social Development and Local Autonomy University of Indonesia. So thank you, Pak Maftuhan, for being here. Would like to hear from you, your opinion. And if you're not familiar with Prakarsa, Prakarsa is also a published policy brief about the universal basic income in Indonesia, I think like in April, if I'm not wrong. So the proposal from Prakarsa is like giving Indonesian people 500,000 rupiah for every household all across Indonesia. That's a proposal, but we'd like to know, so what happened or what's going on right now with this idea or proposal. So please welcome Mas Maftuhan.
Good night, Pak Yanu, Catherine, Mbak Lily, and good morning for all colleagues here in Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm very happy to be here because topic is very important during pandemic crisis. Let me start with a short comment from beginning until Lily's presentation. Yes, we have momentum to push our government to do more progressive in terms of how to government fulfilling citizen rights, not only in the health aspect, but also in the economic aspect. But momentum, it will be still momentum if we are not hand in hand to push strongly, hardly to our government and how to collect more voices to push the policymaker. So I'm happy because we have more and more UB defender, and I think is good for us. And I'm quite optimistic if we continuing our effort, the UBI will in place in many countries. So I will start with the optimist point of view, and I will share some point on Indonesia experiences, especially on social protection scheme. Pak Laude in the beginning already mentioned some challenge, some obstacles in Indonesia, especially during pandemic of COVID-19. But I will give some good progress that Indonesia already have. In my opinion, in the difficult situation right now, we should use one stone to kill two birds, because if we not use like an usual approach, we will more suffering in this situation. So in my opinion, basic income or universal basic services can be one stone to flattening pandemic and recession curve directly. So if we are looking back 2 decades ago, Indonesia crisis because ASEAN financial crisis is caused massive economic, political, and social impact in Indonesia. But in the good way is triggered Indonesia government to set a social protection or assistance program. So according to OECD statement, social protection in Indonesia has proven a key component Indonesian economic recovery. It is transition to democracy, also progress toward a more cohesive society. So Indonesia has moved to welfare regime from poverty relief to social assistance program. Also reform the social insurance system, not only in health system, but also in the employment social security system. So after 2 decades recovery, Indonesia is one of 20 largest economy in the world. It's been a member of G20 countries. Indonesia also have impressive poverty reduction. If we look at 2 decades ago, poverty rates 24.2%, but September 2019 already 9.22. So it is impressive poverty reduction. Indonesia also has improvement significantly living standard. Life expectancy from 65.2 in 1998 to 71.5 in 2018. So it is a good news, but we also have bad news. Inequality, both social and economy, risen strongly over the past 2 decades. It's mean prosperity in Indonesia has not been shared by the entire population. If we use Gini coefficient in 2019, the Gini coefficient of Indonesia is 38 and is rising from 1998 on 31. So it is a big problem in Indonesia, inequality. And sadly, the vulnerability also remain high. More than 30% of population either poor and vulnerable to falling back into poverty. So it is very relevant to measuring our poverty rate amidst COVID-19. So if we are looking back to the data from national statistics, maybe 2 or 1 week ago, the pandemic already affected significantly to raise the poverty rate in Indonesia. But during pandemic, we also have good news in terms of the World Bank classification of countries globally. Indonesia officially an upper middle income country, but it's a very low upper middle income country because only 5 or 4 US dollar brackets with the lowest bracket.
Mas Maftu, I'm sorry. Could you please make the slide bigger?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we're trying to see in the number.
Okay, sorry.
Perfect.
Okay. So good news and bad news in Indonesia, like coming together every moment. So the upper middle income countries and then poverty rate rise to 9.78 in March 2020. It's been 1 6 million people goes to poverty. Yeah, and then COVID-19 pandemic is hampering very hardly to the poor and the middle income communities. So if we use some prediction from other colleagues in quarter 2, maybe up to 12.3 million people may fall into poverty. It's a very problematic in Indonesia. I think it's not only Indonesia, but many countries also have a big challenge also in poverty rate and welfare of people. If we look to the social protection policy in Indonesia before COVID, actually Indonesia not a very unique one. Indonesia, same with other country, they already have two type of social protection. One is social security with a contributory and non-contributory, and then the second is social assistance, conditional and unconditional cash and non-cash. We can see some conditional cash transfer like program Keluarga Harapan or PKH program. We also can see the non-cash food assistance. I think is some social assistance already expanding by the government to respond to COVID-19. Just for make clear the existing social protection in Indonesia, and during COVID-19, government spend or allocate national budget around 203.9 trillion IDR, around 12 or 16, I think 16 million, a billion US dollar in certain program, food assistance, conditional cash transfer, electricity assistance, direct cash assistance through village funds, social cash assistance, president food assistance, and some programs. So in my point in this slide is we actually have a huge money, huge budget on social protection program. So the critical points on a social protection program before COVID or amid COVID-19 is still targeting, fragmented, high moral hazard, already mentioned earlier by Pak Laudi, and then technically very complicated, lack of updated data, and high inclusion exclusion error. So, for example, food assistance program, food stamp program, the distribution of food is not accordance with provision, for example. The social cash assistance also targeting scheme not cover all poor and vulnerable, lack of data, and so on and so on. So from this case, we move to propose basic income and basic services both, and I think we have sufficient budget to implement this proposal. Based on our calculation, if we implement of jaminan penghasilan semesta or universal basic income for individual basis in Indonesia, for example, we cover all working age population, 15 until 64, and then elderly, 65 plus. We exclude child because two reason. One is child still under household, and then lack of budget of government, because if we propose 100% universal, not quasi-universal, it will be difficult, because we still have a bad fiscal policies. As we know, tax ratio of Indonesia still low, even compared with lower middle income country. So 10%, 12%, 11%, compared with the potential tax ratio, maybe around 19 or 20%. As the big economic size of Indonesia right now. So around 203 million people will be got 500,000 IDR, around 40 US dollar, at least 3 months. It will be 4.5 trillion IDR. So yes, around 20 to 23 billion US dollar. I think it's not difficult for government to provide the budget for universal basic income in Indonesia, because if we look to the total budget annually in Indonesia, is still only around 8%. So it's technically, fiscally is possible, but we still hitting politically consequences on that. So our recommendation is how to government speed up provision of universal national health system and social protection system. So two kind of protection. The one is universal health coverage. We already have BPJS Kesehatan. A lot of problem in BPJS Kesehatan, but at least we have national health coverage system. And the second is how to expanding social protection system with universal basic income. The other is how to increase domestic resource mobilization, fiscal reform. In many occasions, I'm always mentioned to push fiscal reform, especially in Indonesia, and how to government of Indonesia, tax authority of Indonesia reach wealthies, how to taxing to wealthies, and how to make sure that our potential taxpayer reach by government and increase significantly year by year. So if we have two protection, in one side is universal health system, and the other side is basic income system. I think it will be very good to make sure the curve of pandemic will be flattened and the recession of impacted by pandemic also will be flattened. I think I will stop right now. I think we will more discuss in discussion today. Over to you, Pak Yanu, and thank you.
Thank you, Mas Maftuhan, for the overview of the policy and updated data from Indonesia. That's really complete information for us. And it looks like we have a few questions on the chat room. So regarding the time, I think we will read all the questions and then we'll give the opportunity to all the speakers to address the question. So the first question from the chat room is from Pak Pik. For all speakers, latest worldwide pandemic that mankind faced is Spanish flu, and it lasts almost 8 years. Indeed, UBI can save people, but it is only a temporary solution. Even Germany might not survive 8 years UBI, let alone Indonesia. Indonesia has to borrow money for their latest social assistance. How government should pursue erasing COVID-19 and saving likelihood in this pandemic, whereas most economical growth is negative. That's for all the speakers. And then the second question from Bu Puji Winarni. I'm so worried with the so much money allocated by the government of Indonesia through many ministries, but miss to the right needy people. Some people get a lot of help from many, but some got nothing. What should actually do to correct those action? To all speakers. So specifically to Catherine, is there any long-term program offered by the UBI in the US, since we don't know yet when the pandemic will end? And the third question from Pak A.S. Hikam, I will give opportunity to ask directly if you mind, Pak Hikam.
Hello, just go ahead, just read it.
Okay, so I mean, we can ask directly since you are here.
Okay, so my question is, how does UBI carried out in a poverty-laden society with a corrupt government? In my view, this socio-political double jeopardy should be addressed also prior to the implementation of such an august and noble endeavor. I'm not pointing out to any country, so you can feel free to respond to my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Aisikam. So yeah, I will go to Catherine first, and then to Pak Laude and Mbak Lily and Mas Maftuhan. You can start, Christine.
Yeah.
Catherine.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I can't speak to it at the political level, but I can at the implementation level. So India, I know, has done a lot of research on this question of how to deliver services effectively, to the right people, which was another question about targeting to the absolute poorest, i.e. those people who are most in need. And then second, how you make sure that money isn't skimmed off the top in the process of delivering aid. I think there are a few ways that people have worked around this. One is in using biometric information, like a fingerprint, to receive your benefits or the social assistance. That's happening in India, and that can kind of prevent the siphoning off the top of funds by government officials as it makes its way down from the national government to recipients. Another way is to do direct transfers from the government to recipients through checks or through mobile phones. In Kenya, that has been a really effective method. One of the reasons actually Give Directly was started was because they saw that so much of the money was going to the middlemen, which is not the same as corruption, but it kind of has a similar impact, which is that less money gets into the hands of the people who need it. And so mobile money has gone a long way there. So I think those are at least two solutions I can think of. And then I would look to India and the research of Poverty Action Lab for more research on those.
Yeah, how about the like the long-term solution? Because it's not only about pandemic, but maybe post-pandemic. Yeah.
Right. So we don't have a long-term program of universal basic income, but we do of the earned income tax credit. This actually also speaks to the other question about how you deliver it to the right people. I think that going through the tax code as opposed to another program that you have to apply to separately is the way to go. I think that really efficiently identifies the people who have low income and low assets, low wealth. And it has relatively low overhead compared to processing a lot of additional applications for other programs. And the Earned Income Tax Credit is our largest anti-poverty program in the US. And we have some evidence that, for instance, it improves well-being, it reduces suicidality at a causal level. And so that is a program that's pretty well studied in terms of its long-term consequences that's delivered through the tax code. But other than that, most basic income trials have been short-term.
Yep. And I think like we remember Andrew Yang pointed out like trickle-up economics. So when we deliver the money to people, that we just like a circle or something like that. Because the question is like, the Spanish flu is 8 years, and how we can use UBI for maybe more than 8 years, maybe, or
Yeah, and just one more point on that, just to follow up. The question of how can you fund this as economic growth is negative, or there's no economic growth. One argument is that it will cost us, if we have a wave of an estimated 20 to 28 million people in poverty and homeless in the next month as a result of what Lily was talking about, the moratoriums on evictions lifting, that will certainly cost the government much more in expenses down the line. So a lot of people are arguing that it's worth it to go into debt, even for trillions of dollars right now, to prevent the accumulation of long-term expenses on things like healthcare systems, criminal justice systems, and housing systems.
All right. Okay, I will go to Pak Laude Sharif. It's about the corruption, double jeopardy from Pak Aisikam as well. Pak Sharif, are you still there?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm happy that all the questions addressed to me, it is actually related in how to prevent corruption from universal basic income, because if you ask me about the UBI itself, I may not answer it at all, because as I already explained it in the opening, that I am not an expert on UBI. But of course, I think from Puji Winarni, I'd say she's quite worried about a lot of money it is allocated by the government of Indonesia through many ministries, but miss the right needy people. Yes, because one of the main problems in Indonesia, it is the absence of very valid data of needy people. If you look at actually the database of the Ministry of Social Welfare, if you compare it with the Ministry of Health, and if you compare it with the Ministry of Home Affairs, and if you compare it with Ministry of Agriculture, those numbers are different. And the difference, it is quite high. It is not like saying for 10,000 people, but actually the disparity, it is quite big. So based on that, when I was in KPK, we were actually trying to reconcile the whole data of the governments. And until today, the reconciled data is about 60 millions. It is based on the reconciled data based on the ID card numbers, single identity card numbers. But even though we already actually reconciled it, we found out that some people actually, they have actually more than one ID numbers, or even actually two. And even a fugitive like Joko Chandra actually is given ID numbers. so this is the problem. So it is very worrying, and of course we need to have a special look for the whole program, because 6 billion US dollar, it is not a small money for Indonesia. And again, who actually going to benefit from this? Especially, I'm really worried about two components. For example, on national economic program, who actually going to benefit from them? It is a big company, or whose company that actually going to benefit for this? Because small and medium enterprises actually have their own allocations. And the second one about tax incentive, where we are going to allocate the tax incentive, which companies? If I am the government, it has to be given priority to the good record company that always pay their tax. But if you look at the richest 1% of Indonesians, and you compare it to the biggest taxpayers, it is not correlated at all. Some people actually accumulated well, or even actually they have land concession more than 2 million hectares, but they are not in the top 10 of the biggest taxpayers. So in the last 2-3 years, most biggest taxpayers actually are BUMN, state-owned companies. So where is Mas? Where are others who actually have a lot of concessions, for example? So that's why I think we cannot just actually believing in governments. The civil society have to look at closely. Unfortunately, in the time of COVID, it is even make it difficult for us actually to check the spending and to check which party that actually get the benefit. The third worry, because we will have an election for regions, mayors, and governors in 3 months, or in 3 months, or in 4 months, in December or November, I forgot. Because this social safety net money can be used as a campaign tool for the incumbents. So that's why we are advocating, okay, can you just delay for general election like next year after the COVID-19 can be contained. But then again, still the government still go with it. And if you look at the new sign of misuse of the money, it is there. Kartu Prakerja, for example, based on the KPK study, it is still misused, it's not go to the right persons, and of course, there are several others programs. So that's why I think we need to have some kind of collaborative effort between the government officials, especially Ministry of finance, a state as supreme audit board like a BPK or BPKP, and of course like law enforcement agencies like KPK. But to be honest, I find it difficult actually now to trust law enforcement agencies as the police and the Attorney General Office, for example, to look after those money because they do not have actually capacity and how to oversee the use of those money. So just hope that actually civil society, people who actually have a special interest, and of course, we have to put our hope from the parliament. But then again, it's quite difficult to trust those people. Sorry for being very pessimistic.
Thank you, Pasarif. I think you pointed out a really important problem about the data, like different data from different ministries. So we really have a big homework to do to make sure that the data is single so everyone can receive a benefit from the state correctly. And also on the tax ratio, that's correct. Like Indonesia is the lowest among Asia Pacific countries, like 11 to 12%. The tax ratio is really gonna be difficult for us if we want to support basic income from the long term, if the tax ratio is still like very low like that. So yeah, I will go to Mbak Lili Hikam. Do you have any feedback or a comment from the question as well?
Yeah, I guess I can answer one of the questions regarding the question that basically the underscore is, how are you going to pay for it?
Yep.
That's basically the gist of the question, yes. So UBI, indeed, it is a temporary solution, but it can also be used as part of a whole solution to the problem. So first of all, I find it funny that whenever we try to implement social safety nets or social safety program, the first question asked by the detractors is always, how are you going to pay for it? But whenever we try to, I don't know, boost the stock market or launch a new war, there's never been a question asked about how are you going to pay for it? Just as an example, the United States Congress recently just passed a $740 billion increase in the defense budget. Nobody asked, how are you going to pay for it? The Indonesian Central Bank injected a total of $583.5 trillion to carry out monetary operations to stabilize the financial market due to the COVID-19 crisis. And it has also bought around $26 trillion worth of bonds to stabilize the market. So we can pay for it. UBI, and as Catherine says, it is better to go into debt, propping up the people than weathering through the crisis that comes from it. The homelessness crisis, the social unrest that could happen that we see previously because of George Floyd's murder. That's basically just the beginning. If none of this is solved, then what we've seen, the looting and everything else, that would just pale in comparison. So having a UBI actually basically, yes, it gives you, it's a bottom-up economy. When you prop up the people, you'll be able to ensure that the people have spending power. And when people have spending power, they're more comfortable quarantining at home. When they're more comfortable quarantining at home, you reduce the spread of COVID-19. And by reducing the spread of COVID-19, you also put less burden on the healthcare system. You put less burden on basically everything on the financial system also, because when people spend, when people have that peace of mind to spend, they will be able to keep the economic wheel going. So it is not part of a long-term solution, but it is a necessary short-term solution until we get a long-term solution, which ideally includes vaccines or any other treatment, or ideally it would be to give universal testing for everyone to ensure that we can basically sequester COVID patient and basically cut down on the spread.
Do you mind to give us a quick comment on the vaccine, since like your background is on the chemistry as well?
For the vaccine,
I heard this morning like we have a successful experiments in Oxford, if I'm not wrong.
yeah, Oxford, that's part of the teams that are developing the vaccine. So the United States is developing one, and it's in conjunction with two pharmaceutical companies, Novavax and Moderna. And as far as I know, they have reached phase 3. So phase 3 is the last phase of a clinical trial before you are approved to give the vaccine commercially available. So hopefully we should get some news from that regarding the efficacy and how well it can either treat COVID or reduce the symptoms, or ideally give immunity to COVID. And I'm not really familiar with the work in UK, although I think it should be the same types of vaccines. So the problem with coronavirus and the vaccine for this type of virus is that it mutates very fast. So we do not know currently what strain is still out there, what is the predominant strain. So what we should have right now is, I think the best we could hope for is like the flu vaccine. So it will help you not get coronavirus, but it does not confer 100% immunity, unlike the measles vaccine or the polio vaccine, because of the nature of the virus and how rapidly it mutates. Also, it does not exempt you from the fact that you could still get it in the future, even after you are vaccinated. So the development of the vaccine, that's one thing. The second thing is the availability of the vaccine. Ideally, it should be, in an ideal world, it should be free for everyone. But unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world, so there will be cost. The best we could hope for is that the vaccine will be affordable for everyone, and that it is efficacious and it's safe.
Yes, totally agree with that. Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. And then another disease, another therapy that is being used is remdesivir. However, remdesivir only reduces the severity of the disease, and also it reduces your hospital stay. So it does not cure COVID. It helps you manage the symptoms. So yeah.
Thank you, Mbak Lily, for.
Excuse me, can I ask Mbak Lily, please? For example, yeah, because we've been actually, I think some of the money in Indonesia can also allocated for the development of like some possibility research on vaccine, for example, in many university and research centers here in Indonesia. Do you think, is it possible for like a country like Indonesia to develop vaccines for COVID-19, or it is just a waste of money? No. Sorry.
I think it is possible. You just have to, the Indonesian scientific community, in my opinion, has been very underappreciated by its own citizens. And it's not that we don't have the smart people to be able to develop this vaccine. It's not that at all. It's that we don't have the resources. We're not being supported by either the government or by this, we're not being supported by the government. And because the government do think it's a waste of money to invest